So without further ado, let me introduce our guests and we'll welcome them to our virtual Texas state. Becky Larson graduated with a master's degree in our digital media program in 2016, and she's a UX designer at USAA. And Rebekah Gould graduated with a PR degree in 2015 from us, and she is a digital product manager at USAA. They just met just now while you guys were waiting. I introduced them. So it's it's a very big company. They actually had some common projects that they were kind of talking about. So it's a big company, but there was some interconnection. Rebekah also has a strategic communication master's degree from Liberty University that she got since she graduated from us. So the first thing I want to do is talk about what each of your roles are. So Becky, maybe you can start with talking about what it is that you do as a UX designer.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Becky. As an experienced designer, so I've done a whole lot of different things as part of the Chief Design Office at USAA. And I think that's like kind of the foundation of experience design is it can mean a lot of different things. And it's actually really valuable to have a lot of different skill sets on a team. So when I joined, I basically joined as a front-end developer. So I was doing, CSS, I was building not actual products, but I was building prototypes. So really thinking about like the design process. So starting at the beginning in terms of research and identifying what it is that the product needs to have in terms of features, how is a person going to navigate this? And then I was using HTML and CSS, jQuery, JavaScript to build prototypes and get those tested with our users. Since then, I've been at USA for about 3 years now, and I have a team of developers that I work with now I have some really fantastic front-end developers that I'm working with. So I'm not doing as much coding myself these days. And so now my daily duties really depend on what phase I am in a project. So it could be research. And when I say that, I mean interviewing users, asking them about an experience they've had or asking about what they would need in an experience, and then taking insights you're getting from those interviews and translating those into actual features that then you are coming up with the ideas and concepts for, testing those at like low fidelity. So just, boxes and arrows and wireframes, and then moving all the way to finish product design and seeing something through to being released.
So Rebekah, when you were in our program, we didn't really talk about product management that much, but this group, for the past couple weeks, we've been doing readings about product management, and I've done a bunch of research in the past few years about product management, particularly in media companies, so they saw some of the results of that and some interviews that I've done in the past. Talk about what you do and how you got involved with that.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, it's really interesting because it's not a role you hear about prior to accidentally finding yourself in it, like I have. So, you go to school and they talk about the standard PR people, and there's just a lot more to it, right? So I actually interned with USAA doing social media. And my follow-on internship was a digital media internship, which actually ended up being a product management role, essentially. So what I'm in charge of is anything, when you log into our app, anything you see there, I'm in charge of. So we're trying to make sure that whatever you see when you land in the app initially is what you need for whatever the reason is you're logging in that day. So it's really cool that Becky went first, actually, because we work really closely with our design partners for researching kind of what it is that members need from us in terms of new functionality, or if there are issues in our current app that we need to resolve. We do a lot of research prior to coming up with an experience, which Becky, her team helps us with. And then what I do is I take the data and the research and I make a case for why we need to do it. And then I help facilitate getting the developers writing the requirements for the changes. You'd be surprised how many requirements it takes to make one little change in a mobile application. Every little detail has to be called out. Even something so much as launching the app, right? What happens when I tap it? And so that's kind of what my job is outlining what the member experience is going to be and then helping make sure it gets executed correctly.
the interviews that they have read or viewed that I have done, they will kind of resonate with them what you said about people falling into product management. So many of them talked about how this wasn't really anything I ever thought of, but then I just sort of fell into it for various reasons. And they had in person a few weeks ago an actual human guest speaker, a former student, Andrew Waldrop, works for HEB, and he talked a lot about the details of their mobile app. He's a product manager for mobile here in Austin at their HEB Digital. And so he was saying exactly the same thing about how detail oriented you have to be to make even the slightest change. HEB's been making a lot of changes lately.
Yes. Yeah.
So one thing that Rebecca said that I think is such a great point is that like so much of what's important about product management and design is being able to explain and communicate and argue your design. So she right away talked about like being able to explain the return on investment, right? So the ROI of your ideas and why it's important to get funding and development teams for this. So anytime Cindy has you like talking about like why you're going to do this for a project, that's like, it's super, super key skills.
Yeah, I mean, especially the ROI thing that you just talked about. They had a whole financial section that they had to do in their research project. I'm sorry, Rebecca, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say the communication skills are invaluable, right? Like it doesn't matter what job you're doing, you need those skills. And if you would have told me that the product management role that I'm in existed, I would have told you that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I think it's awesome that you're getting them exposure to all these different roles, because I don't know that we do a great job in college just advertising all the different roles that exist outside of your stereotypical communications roles.
We see time and time again when I speak to very technical people that they say that the hardest part of their job or the most important part of their job is communicating. And that's what we're good at in mass comm. And so if you layer the technology on top of that, it's a winning combination every time.
Well, and a lot of times the communication skills are hard to teach, but you can teach technical skills, right? So I guess some advice would be don't be afraid, right? As long as you're apt to learn. I mean, I know way more about technology and services and native development and server-side development than I ever thought I would in my entire life. But it's just been learned, right? People teach you as you go, and that's what makes you better.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I think
definitely. People will hire you if you're a great communicator, and they will teach you like all of the other things. I mean, it's really, really key.
So Becky, I want them to understand how you came to our program. Like, what was your background before you came to the master's degree at Texas State?
Sure. Yeah, I think very similar to Rebecca. I think a lot of us kind of find ourselves in experience design and product management. So my undergrad is in Japanese language and literature and linguistics. So I have a background in language and communication, but you know, with an eye on like translation from one culture to another. And then I lived in Japan for a little while, continuing my studies. And then, I graduated right in the middle of the last recession. So when everything was kind of going like crazy back then. And so I didn't work in that field for a long time. I worked in coffee shops, I had a bunch of different jobs. And then I decided I really wanted to acquire a few more hard skills. So I started looking at programs, and I was initially looking at computer science programs because I knew I wanted to use my language skills and acquire a programming language and use what I knew about translation and communication and moving from one format to another to work in computer science. But I really, really, really wanted to leverage the fact that I was a good communicator. And the program at Texas State was the only one that I could find in the area the only one that I found at all, but it happened to be, close to where I lived, that combined communication and learning how to code, because that's actually not something that you see very often. So that was how I came to entering the master's program at Texas State. And that was literally life-changing. The development skills that I got there, coupled with honing the communication skills I already had, are the reason that I got hired 100%. The reason that I was able to distinguish myself, and move into a full-time role, because USAA often hires people as contractors first, which is a pretty common model for these big companies. It was sort of, the beginning of everything was starting at the master's program.
I think it's important that, to know that having a language background is very relevant to coding and communication. So, and then Becky also had a natural aptitude toward technology. She took to it very quickly. But I really want to point out that she had a very similar background to what all of you are now getting in our degree. A basic web design class and one a little bit more advanced than that. And that was kind of it, right?
Literally anything that you guys are good at or interested in, you can like argue for how that supports you being good in these kinds of roles. Like, so I, was able to say, look, I'm very good at thinking about how to translate this language to this language. And what do you have to do when you work at a company? You need to be able to translate between developers and business partners. You need to be able to translate between your end users, members, and the people that are building their experiences. So like whatever you guys are good at, whatever your special skill is, whatever your background is, there, like you can couple that with a few like really key hard skills and prove your worth.
Now, Rebecca was in my web design class when she was in our program, but like she said, as a PR major, what did you do to continue your education to be able to learn all these things? I mean, you mentioned generally learning, asking questions, but were there certain specific things you had to learn to be able to move into this role?
So I think some of the skills that you fall into this role, right? But you fall into it because you're good at something. And that something is usually like, can you communicate well enough to get your point across and convince people to buy into what you're selling? Are you able to motivate people to work towards your goal and your ideas? And do you have the skills to be able to look at a big problem and break it down into small steps and actually make progress on those steps? So I think it was just kind of the overall communications aspect of my degree that really helped of, how do I break this down and make it consumable? How do I take steps to get to where I'm trying to go? And then obviously on top of that, it is the hard skills, right? So just learning more about technology generally, you don't even have to have the skill of being able to code, right? It's just understanding the value that technology brings, kind of what the markets look like in terms of what's Apple doing, what's Google doing, what's the new trend, how much do you know about artificial intelligence, how much do you know about the Internet of Things, all of those, the knowledge itself about the thing and how it works and how the trends are going and what's the next big thing, that knowledge is crucial as a product owner, because if you don't know the nuances between Apple and Android, then you're going to design something that's incorrect, or you're going to miss something that's really key on how people who use Android over iOS view different things. So that market knowledge, and honestly, I think college kids have a really big advantage because they're super involved in technology, right? That's, I think, what my skill was, honestly, coming into it was not only was I able to communicate, and when you asked me to do something, I could do it and I would do it in a way that exceeded your expectations, but I was able to bring a fresh perspective about how all of this technology is impacting younger individuals, because when you're hiring out of college, like you're going into a massive company that's 35,000 people who are not 21, 22, right? So even just being young and kind of understanding the technology landscape gives you a leg up, and you just have to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I think that so everything Rebecca is saying, is just a fantastic illustration that being curious and willing to voice your opinion and do it in a, persuasive way. So being willing to ask questions, being willing to suggest something, being curious enough to pay attention to what's going on in meetings. I mean, those are that goes so far.
And
I think, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, you're in an area that requires you to be creative, and that is not a skill that everybody has, right? And so maybe it's not a hard skill in the sense that I went and I learned how to use Photoshop, so now I'm creative. That's not how it works. It's,
I never use Photoshop. Yeah.
Photoshop's a lost art right now. They talk about these problems, right? And some people can't just sit there and formulate a solution. And so if you're a creative type and you're able to see that solution in your head, you're immediately valuable.
Yeah, I said this to Cindy the last time I saw her. I wish someone had told me when I was young, because I had an arts background and I grew up drawing and painting a lot. And I thought that the only way to be creative as an adult in a job was to be a painter, be an artist, something like that. I wish someone had told me when I was younger that they're in every single job you could have, especially these ones. Like, we happen to be very lucky. Like, we get to be creative every single day, coming up with, crazy ideas, testing them, like finding different ways of doing things. So I wish I knew how many different ways you could be creative.
I mean, I recall when I was first learning how to do web design, that moment of, wow, I can be creative when I never thought I was a creative person before, because I wasn't artistic. I didn't have really any other kind of skills. I wasn't a musician. I couldn't sing. But then when I could do this, I was like, fulfilled in a certain way, fulfilled to the point where I changed my whole life so that I could be teaching it. So we've been talking a lot about product management, and they've been doing a lot of reading about it. And the understanding is that you have to communicate with a lot of different teams. So what is the process like in managing your product, Rebekah?
So it's really interesting at USAA specifically because we are so many things, right? We're an investment company, we're a bank, we're an insurance company, and there are a ton of other things sprinkled in throughout there. And so for my team, we're considered an enterprise team. So when you log into your mobile app, you're not just going to expect to see banking. You are going to expect to see banking, insurance, investment. So as the person that kind of owns that space, it's my job to go to the people that are in the bank and go to the people that are in the insurance company, and kind of identify what their problems are and how I can help them solve it by saying, we're going to create, a good example would be that people complain that their cards get blocked when they travel, right? People call, it costs us money, it costs frustration. So we went to the bank and we said, hey, let's try to solve this, right? And so we came up with an idea that we could predict you were traveling based on your current location and your home location, right? It's not like crazy stuff, but it makes the difference. So you're working with the people that have the knowledge about the products in the bank. So they know about the credit cards, they know about the debit cards, but I'm the mobile expert, right? So we work together to identify what is the best way to solve this problem based on your expertise and my expertise. And then you can really start, the most important thing is to how do you measure success, right? And so you have to identify what those success metrics are, which is, can I make this easier for members and reduce the frustration and the number of calls? And then you can measure your success, right? And I think that's something that's really important in product management that often gets overlooked is, I have to be able to measure the success. And most of the time, how members feel about it's not the right answer, because it's very hard to measure. So you always have to identify what are those data points. And you'd be surprised, like little tiny changes in mobile applications can save you millions of dollars. And so it's really cool to be able to have that kind of impact.
And so Becky, how are you involved in the product management process? I'm assuming a UX designer would collaborate with a product manager in various capacities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that shows up in a lot of different ways at a big company. So different teams, different product managers have their own places that they like to collaborate, whether it's along the whole point together or at key checkpoints. Yeah, we go to our product managers all the time for data a lot of times. Like, so obviously there's qualitative research that we're doing in terms of like interviewing members and getting, and what we are talking about is like insights into what is going wrong here, or when you filed your claim, a year ago, like tell me about that process and tell me about what sucked about it and tell me about what was great about it. But our product managers have this wealth of data and analytics, and how are people actually using the experiences? What are they clicking on? Where are they going? As well as like tons of survey, you know, data points that they're gathering from members that are already using things. So a lot of times we are working very closely with product managers during the research phase. We will collaborate, you know, as we are coming up with concepts, we'll start to feed those back to our product managers to see, okay, like, where could this concept fit into a larger framework, you know, because you don't want to create just like bespoke one-off things. You want this to feel like USAA. In terms of like launching a product, it's very important to have a plan for how are you going to is this a new thing? Is it a new design of a thing? How are you going to talk to your members about this, like getting launched? Are we going to tell them ahead of time? Are we going to say what to expect? Are we going to, you know, gather surveys while it's going? So I think that's some of the difference, is that like product managers are focused on sort of the end-to-end like life cycle, right? They're like checking in on this, like it's for sure their baby in terms of like what is going on with this thing once it's launched. Whereas like, you know, I like to do that too, but in some ways, like I'm focused on like some of the pre-launch experience, right? Like a lot of the concepting and getting it together. And then, you know, if you have the opportunity to come back at something and like check in after it's launched. But that's, you know, it always depends like what is on your plate, if that's going to happen.
Are there tools that you use in your organization, productivity tools, prototyping tools? What are the tools of the trade for each of you? Why don't you start, Rebekah?
Slack. Slack has changed our lives. I heard you talk about it. It is so weird, right? We've had Skype, we have email, but just the flexibility and the mobility of Slack, I mean, it really has changed the way we communicate as a program, right? It's easier for us to communicate. It's all in one spot. We can have big group conversations. So that's definitely a big tool that we rely on for communication on a daily basis. And then obviously we have like our own analytics tools. So we use Adobe Analytics to actually, to Becky's point, track what members are doing. So we can go in and actually look at the click trails and say, well, there's this huge dropout on this one button. So there must be either something wrong with it or it doesn't make sense. So that's a big thing for us, is just to be able to measure the success of our products, especially to Becky's point, once we launch them, we really have to keep an eye on them, because any developer knows you can release defects really easily. And no matter how many times you test, there will always be something. So just constantly monitoring through those tools.
Slack is key, especially when you talk about like communicating again, like, so when you're communicating across groups, like it's really great to try and get away from email as much as possible. So like I work full-time remote, so I'm a big fan of in-person meetings when I can, but that also like it sucks up a lot of time, and you have to just be really aware of like what the questions are you're asking. So Slack is an invaluable tool for reaching out to people in other organizations, like our digital product management partners or our developers. So we have a Slack channel that has all of our developers that are on like my project in it, and we can ask them questions on there. In terms of design tools and development tools, so we use Sketch. We don't really use Adobe a whole lot. Like obviously it gets used for folks that maybe are more in a graphic or logo or illustrative focused area. I'm not, so I'm not a visual designer by trade. I certainly do that work, but it's not necessarily where my passion lies. But Sketch is fantastic. We use InVision for prototyping, which is a really, really great tool, very easy. We do have, some designers who are familiar enough with front-end development to knock together prototypes using either HTML, CSS, and like JavaScript for some like basic functions, or, putting together like a low-level actual build where you have like some placeholder data on the back end. It really depends. I would say more on the Sketch and InVision side though.
So we should talk about the current situation. First of all, Becky works in New York City, so she lives in Manhattan, and obviously there's a lot of things going on in Manhattan right now.
Yeah.
and you work remotely anyway, but have things changed in terms of the work processes in your company because of the pandemic?
Yeah. I mean, it's changed. The whole company has changed to address this, and and they've put out statements, especially like in San Antonio, because they're such a big part of the community there. As everybody who can be work from home is working from home. And if they're not, then there's social distancing in place. Like they are putting a lot of effort into making sure that employees are safe, and members are getting like the service that they need. Obviously, it's a financial company, so like this is not like low stakes. Like people need access to what they need access to, right? So it's very, very top of mind.
Money, insurance, those are going to be very key things for people going forward and having access to information. How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah.
How has this affected your work?
Well, I'll be really honest, I hate working from home. I get a lot of energy from, I guess, people at work, which I probably would have told you wasn't true because I'm kind of an introvert, but I think you miss out on the friendships. USAA it's a great company. They have great people. So like some of my closest friends are at work, right? And so I don't see them every day. It's harder to have those hallway conversations, but it has kind of leveled the playing field, right? Because we do have a lot of remote workers within our organization, and sometimes we forget about them, and not on purpose, right? But because you're on the phone and there's always technology issues, and if they don't speak up, then they get, left out. And so I think it's a really cool environment to all be on the same playing field, right? Even our offices in Plano, we're all on Skype together, struggling together. So there's not that, like, the people in person are overpowering the conversation. So there are benefits like that. And USAA moved their entire workforce nearly in like 3 weeks. And it was something they never thought was possible. So it will be really interesting to see, do people come back? Do they try to stay home permanently? Does USAA make a play at downsizing a little bit in terms of who comes into the building? Because our building is about the size of the Pentagon. And so you can only imagine how much money it takes to keep a building of that magnitude up and running.
It's so true, like the leveling of the playing field. So as someone who's like worked from home for like the past year and a half, it's crazy having everybody else in that situation. So everybody is dealing with like dogs barking, kids like crying in the background, your doorbell is ringing. And where in the past, like I had to super duper police that stuff, because people that are not in that situation just like don't have as much empathy for it, and they might think it makes you like unprofessional or something because you're dealing with like those sorts of like home issues. So it's been kind of cool to see everybody like in the midst of that.
How's everybody in New York feeling? What's the feel there right now? How can you describe it for us?
It's a little intense. Like everybody that is out is in masks, and a lot of times like gloves, and you're very careful. You have to kind of suit up if you're going to the grocery store or something. Supply chains are getting better, so things are not as sold out as they have been. I will say today it was sunny, so there were a lot of New Yorkers out, because that's one thing that you can't like take away from New Yorkers. They are very good at policing their vitamin D, so they went out to get that where they can. But I mean, I think the city is doing a really, really, really good job at working very, very hard at this. Like every day at 7 p.m., everybody opens their windows and like goes crazy for all the healthcare workers and everything, and applauding for them, which is pretty cool. It's like, it's bad, but it's getting better, and everybody's coming together to try and do what they can.
New York is an interesting city that tends to come together in times of strife. But I assume that there's just a lot of odd moments where the streets are bare when they're used to be busy. Perhaps subways, if you're probably not getting on a subway right now,
No,
but
yeah.
I'm assuming the subway trains are empty, and restaurants having to do curbside or delivery that never had done them before, and the adjustment for all of that. And then just like the sort of camaraderie that New Yorkers have, where they just like to be out in public and crushed together. I mean, that is just a very different feel right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're very used to sharing a small amount of space with a lot of people, and your personal bubble just kind of shrinks. You know, you have your own small space, and you're fine with that. And it is very strange having it be so quiet and empty, and knowing that everybody is just kind of in their homes, like sheltering. I mean, I've been working, you know, in a 1-bedroom apartment with my wife for the past month now. I wrote like in my journal this morning, day 30 quarantine. So it's different. It's a whole new world.
If you all were to look at someone's portfolio, what, you know, first of all, how important is a portfolio, an online portfolio, and what would you like to see in a portfolio?
I showed the work that I did at Texas State and my portfolio at every single job interview I had after graduating, and I am positive was, you know, crucial to me getting hired. Also, just being able to answer questions and have, you know, because I was going in for a design role and specifically a front-end development role, I had to have, you know, the hard skills, and I was asked questions about CSS and how certain things worked, and the portfolio is really key. It doesn't even have to be like, it doesn't have to be slick. It doesn't have to look like something that they are expecting to be launched from their product. It has to be something interesting. Like, so it just has to be something that you built, you put time into, there's some work on the back end, you know, or like there's something interesting to look at, something interesting that's interacting, that shows that you're the kind of person that's going to put the effort in, that cares about things that you're building, is curious. Like, that's what they want to see in job interviews, because that's the stuff that they can't teach you. Like, if you're not a curious individual who isn't gonna like pursue something and put the effort in, that's basically what they're trying to find out by your portfolio.
What I do think your portfolios can demonstrate is, to Becky's point, your creativity, your ability to create a solution to a problem and be able to see that solution through. That's a lot of times what we're looking at on resumes is, what have you done to prove to me that you have technical understanding or technical experience of some sort? For product managers, they're starting, especially digital product managers, they're starting to look for those technical skills, because you really have to understand how technology works in order to be a good product manager. There's just no way around it. So they're really looking for the convergence of a business mindset, familiar with technology, even if you can't code out an entire app, just even the HTML is enough to at least kind of understand how building websites work. And then the design aspect, being able to formulate a solution in your head, even if it's not beautiful. And then data, understanding how data plays a role in all of these. So if you're applying for a product manager role, keep that in mind. If your portfolio can display or showcase a lot of that, that's great. When you're writing your resume, make sure you are phrasing things like, there was this problem, I did this to solve it, here were the results. Be very result driven whenever you're filling out resumes for a product management role, because that's what they're looking for, right? Somebody who understands that process, because you can teach the technical skills, but you cannot always teach the comprehension piece of it.
Yeah, like I haven't coded in a long time because I haven't needed to on my latest project. Like I said, our development team is really well staffed right now. But the fact that I know how to talk about code and technical, you know, services, APIs, the data, like people really, really want people who can translate, because there are a lot of people out there that are not good communicators. And so having someone in the room that can understand what different sides are saying and clarify it and, you know, make it succinct and easy to understand, that's a great skill to have.
Look at the stable companies, right? Look at the companies that aren't going anywhere. That's going to be your Fortune 500s. That's going to be HEB, the grocery chains, all of the things that are in demand right now. People are still hiring, right? USAA is still hiring. We still have to put an app out there. We still have to answer phone calls. Like, you just have to be intentional about where you're looking right now.
there are a lot of opportunities at some of the larger companies. They're going to be a little bit less, impacted by some of this craziness. There certainly are a lot of small companies, both small in terms of number of people who work there and small in terms of like their focus or maybe their market share at this point. You'll get a sense of if this is a place that is doing well. I mean, I think that this kind of environment breeds innovation. So you're probably going to see a lot of new things starting as soon as the outlook starts to improve just a little bit. I wanted to work at USAA. I've been a member forever. I'm a military kid. I knew that they were a good company and that they were going to care about the things that I cared about. So that was really important for me. There are a lot of companies out there like that right now that are still hiring. I would say like 100% go with like a place that feels like the right fit. I will tell you guys that development, design, product management, those are jobs that are not going anywhere. Like those are skills that we really need. And a lot of times, like I think most people I know that are in those roles luckily have been very fortunate during this like crisis, and they're able to still work. They're able to work remotely. So like we were able to take our entire design organization remote, like almost immediately. I'm sure the same is true of the product management organization, because like we have great tools and we can do these things from home. So very, very, very fortunate. And because we're able to do that, our company is able to do what it can to contribute back to the community and try to help people who are not in that position. So I think that, if you're interested in these kinds of roles, they are great during an emergency.
Mm-hmm. And digital's not going anywhere, right? If anything, this pandemic is going to create new digital innovations that will be with us for years to come, because all of a sudden we were forced to be a remote community, right? So I think digital is a great, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's design, development, it's going to be a pretty safe environment, I think, for a long time until AI takes our place.
And that's still digital.
Still digital. Somebody's got to build it, right?
Right. You can still be connecting with people on social media and expanding your network. I just did 8 interviews with Texas State alumni, and I use social media to put them out there, and you all have access to my Twitter and my Instagram. You can retweet that, you can reply, and I put all their handles in that they had. You can reply and say, I really like the point where you talked about this, and then maybe start some sort of a connection with people. Particularly, these are alumni. They want to help you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and just on the, current emergency, there are a lot of companies, even big solid companies that probably are in a position to hire, that are slowing things down right now just so they can figure out how to handle the current situation, right? Like, so they might not be in a position where they're needing to lay people off or where they can't hire, but they just have like some crazy priorities to deal with. Like they got to make sure that their employees are healthy. They got to make sure that they're still functioning with everyone remote, and that their, users and members and clients, whatever you're calling them, are getting what they need. And then things will either start to improve, or we'll all get used to this and they'll, get back to hiring. And it does long time for a big company.
Yeah, I'd say another thing that
it's okay.
I say another thing to consider is freelance work. I mean, if you can convince somebody, even if it's one of your family members, to let you redo their website for their small business, boom. Nobody has to know it was your mom, right? So you can play that up. So while you're maybe not employed by whatever company you're looking at being employed by, there's still ways to kind of get yourself out there and continue to add to your portfolio.
Well, let's thank them, and if you can unmute and let's give them a hand. or give them some big ups, or, you know, whatever you can do, thumbs up. You can put emojis. We've got some emoji clapping on there. This is really a fascinating talk, and I appreciate so much your time and your insight. And I'm just really proud of both of you. I mean, I have often had this experience where I have a student in class and I see how they are in class, and in a very short time, they become seasoned professionals with competencies and expertise that they didn't even know that they would have at this point. And all of you will be them. All of you in a year or two are going to be Becky and Rebekah. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Let's stay in touch.
You.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, like I'm sure, you know, Cindy is going to give you all our contact info. So
Yeah, for sure.
feel free.
Yeah, LinkedIn, any questions you have, even if you want us to look over your resume, just having a second set of eyes wouldn't hurt. Whatever we can do to help.
That's so nice of you. We appreciate that offer. So we'll let you guys go, and really everybody can go, but if there's anybody who needs to stay on and ask me a question right now, you can do that. Otherwise, the class is over. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
Bye-bye.